Yeah, well, we got to figure it out. But yeah, I don't know why there was a cascade of things that happened right when everything was working fine, and the moment we went live, the video started messing up. My computer shut down a lot, and my camera shut down. It was very bizarre. The robots are not happy with us, Lena. So, for starters, why don't we just you want to just tell me a little? Hold on.
Uh-oh, more
So,
robots.
nope, we're good. I needed to hit record.
Oh,
Minor thing. Yeah, so I'm here with Tessa Lena. Tessa is a musician as well as a writer. She blogs at Tessa Fights Robots .com, correct?
yes.
Okay.
And also on Substack, tessa.substack.com.
Okay, gotcha. The nice thing about me doing it this way too is I can edit it and it'll actually be a cleaner,
Yeah, yeah.
nicer. The final product will actually be nicer. It's just more work for me. Woohoo!
Yeah, we're all about the final product.
Right. Uh, so, Tessa, you want to tell me a little bit about kind of, what's your background? You said you're from you were born and grew up in Moscow, and then you moved
Yes.
to Chicago. Is that correct?
And then I moved to Chicago, and then I moved to New York, and I'm enjoying myself as much as the circumstance allow right now in New York. But yeah, my background, it's, well, that's a very long story, but music is my own thing. I've been doing that since I was 5. I was doing classical piano and lots of music. And then I decided that I wanted to study Tibetan, and I thought of myself as a Buddhist for a while, which I do not think of myself as such right now. But so I did Tibetan studies. I went to Tibet. I studied linguistics and music, Tibetan music. Then I moved to Chicago after some adventures, and then I had a lot of adventures in Chicago. Then I was kind of, well, I mean, I like New York. I grew up in Moscow, which is why New York is a much more fitting vibe for me. And I've been doing writing also probably all my life, and I did many, many, many things in life to make money. So that's the gist of the story. And then, of course, for the past year, I've been fairly outspoken about this whole pandemic response because I figured that we should, and it's almost like a civic duty because I don't want to go into full dystopia and I feel responsible.
Right. I feel that a lot of people are feeling, well, some people are feeling that. Some people think we're just going to go back to normal here soon. But so, what was it that kind of made you first start to question things? Were you always someone that kind of questioned authority?
Well, let me answer that in the part 2 of my answer. So, specifically last year, what made me question is the fact that I was involved in musicians' rights activism for a few years, and that brought me to research big tech and what they were trying to do, their philosophy, their theology, and various business models that they actually tried on musicians and other creative professionals first. And of course, then people stopped eating because musicians were no longer making money and everybody got completely poor. And I remember back then I was joking saying that, oh, if they try to apply that model to, say, food or farming, we're doomed. I mean, like, we're completely screwed. Everybody will go hungry. But that was kind of a joke, meaning that nobody thought that they would actually try. And when last year happened, all of a sudden I saw that all those things they were trying to do theologically and in terms of like surveillance and controlling people and merging people with machines and all those things that I have been kind of writing about as in horrible dystopian things that may happen sometime later. They're horrible, but sometime in the future, that's what they're trying to do. All of a sudden, I saw all those things actually happening, and that was surreal because I knew that they were trying to bring everything online: education, medicine, everything we do with each other, talking, communication, entertainment. So that was their long-standing dream, and Googles of the world have been going at it and bullying and lobbying and bribing politicians for quite a while. But that was mostly hidden from the general public. And of course, people are always busy and people have many things to do. And when people in my circles of musicians activism that were trying to bring attention to that, and of course most people went, oh, get a job, like that's too much and that's too dystopian. And so then when it started happening, I was like, oh, but it's not a reaction. No matter what's happening with health, and of course in the beginning I was freaking out about health just like everybody else, but for a very short time, because then I realized that there were too many holes in the narrative, and it was just new holes coming up every day. And in addition to that, it was impossible to live in this neurotic mode. It was just not life. And I kind of snapped out it very quickly. But then all the measures that were suggested, I even had I have to admit, facetious conspiracy theory a year ago saying that those masks that they were trying to force on everybody, that it was really the way of big tech to train the massive population for smart face wearables, because that's what they wanted to do. Computer to brain interface is something that is at frontier currently. They're actively working on that, but how do you convince wide amounts of people to adopt face wearables or brain to computer interfaces? That's impossible. So, but if it's a health measure, then everybody gets trained to wear masks and get used to that. And then a couple of years later, they say, oh, by the way, here we go, here's a smart mask. And even though I did have this conspiracy theory, I did not fully take it seriously, because that just seemed too much. Like that is logical, that is consistent with how they operate, but nonetheless, it is too much, too insidious. And, I didn't want to believe in it myself, but it seems like I've been correct so far with things happening right now, and smart masks actually being created and introduced, and this new thing where there's new contest that was just announced, like a smart innovation mask innovation challenge or something like that. So that is a very long answer to your question, and then I already forgot the question, of course. So that was what was I going to do in part 2? I forgot.
Well, I was asking kind of what was it? Have you always been kind of questioning authority? And
yes, so I guess by nature, yes. By upbringing, the opposite of that. I was raised as a very compliant child, which was not fitting me at all, and that is a much longer story. But essentially, because I was a very good student at school, that became kind of the performance mode. And I guess that is how they raise children. They love was somehow implicitly tied to performance as a student. And people, I'm sure nobody thought about it this way explicitly, but implicitly that was the way. And because every child wants love, I really wanted love. So I was performing, and I was very compliant up until a certain point. And then I became the opposite of compliant, and then of course, that created some kind of problems, as in, and who do you think you are? What do you think is better than everybody else? And like, what are you doing? What is all this? And so I was swinging back and forth between being compliant so as not to ruin all of my relationships in life, and being myself. And I guess now I do not believe that compliance does much good. So I'm not particularly compliant.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, I know for myself and other people who have kind of gone down the rabbit hole, so to speak, it has caused a lot of rift in not being, being defiant or being non-compliant amongst family and friends and different people within your community. Have you experienced some of that?
As of recently, amazingly minimally, because I do value my relationship as such, and I really work with people, as in, I present my perspective. I do not try to make them be like me. I don't think it's a valid approach. I don't think it is spiritually good to force people to think like me. So I insist on being accepted. And I work towards that with people who are extremely important to me. And then, of course, in the broader circle, I do what I can, and then I let it be. But either that was love that created a good vibe, or luck, or I don't know. I didn't have too many problems, actually. Some people, very, very few, went militant, and I just let go of them. I don't fight with them. I just let them be. I had to block a couple of people, but only after they started accusing me of things and being ridiculous. Then outside of that, I try to talk to the human side of everybody. And I think that is the only thing that we can do, because ultimately there's a logic to the universe and there's a logic to life and there's a bigger picture that we cannot necessarily see in each moment. And I think it is far more important to allow for free will and to allow for harmony to form with all our love, but on its own terms, than to drag people into my thinking. So I really draw a distinction between protecting myself, which is, I think, everybody is obliged to protect themselves and their soul and their integrity and protect their right to be who they are. And on the other hand, telling others what to do. I do not believe we are really authorized to tell others what to do. So, in other words, I think that I did not have too many issues. Some people, I mean, if I know that they absolutely are not willing to come over to my side right now and they're not in my very close circles, then I just talk to them and I'm patient with them. I think patience is very important. And I try to present my perspective softly, with love, with respect for who they are. And I think everybody comes to their truth on their terms at some point. Sometimes it's very late in life, but I don't think we own others. So
Yeah, that's a good point. And I the free will thing is also a big thing for me. It's like, I'm not telling you what to do. Don't force me to do what you think I should do. And I think that if we had a world where people actually had agency, that's a big thing for me. Is just that allowing people to act on their own agency. I think the world would be a lot better place. It'd be a little bit more chaotic. Obviously have, like, when everybody's operating from the same playbook, it can be a lot more efficient. But I think there's a lot that's lost in that approach, and losing the diversity of voices and perspectives, and also the truth. I mean, I don't think the truth comes from a single authority that typically has a lot to gain from a certain outcome, you know. So some of the notes I noted, some of the things we talked about before were the idea of fear and the role that fear plays in a lot of what's going on. What are your thoughts on that?
it is interesting because I was just going to talk about it. I was going to respond to what you said, because I completely agree that allowing people to act on their agency is of utmost importance. And I think it is spiritually more important to act from a good place and to respect other people's free will than to make everybody act in a way that I or whoever think is right or correct. I think it is undeniably more important to be true to existential principles and let people be who they are and figure things out with love, and help them if they ask for it, and help them if we think that we can, but also allow them be themselves. And I think fear is the opposite of that. And I think that almost in every case of fanaticism, whether it's, well, I guess I'm talking about well-intended fanaticism, because people who intentionally try to cause trouble, try to intentionally destroy, do evil, that is the entire category. They have a purpose. They have a purpose in society, like any predator. They serve the purpose of making sure that we don't fall asleep. So they're valid. Their existence is valid. However, most people are not like that. But a lot of people end up being fanatical about whatever idea they have because of fear. Because, for instance, if I think that unless I make everybody act the way I think is correct, then I am going to be in danger and the world is going to be horrible. And if I think that my fear is more important than trusting the universe to make things right, while doing my absolutely best to be courageous and loving and brave, if I have this fear, then the chance of me becoming a fanatic in even the best idea is a lot stronger than my chance of not becoming a fanatic. And I think that I actually think about it a lot. And, if it's too much philosophy, then I apologize. But that line that we cross when we start out from a good place and we have this idea that is good, that is genuinely positive idea, but the moment we cross that line and we decide that we're entitled to force others, to lead others by force, I think that is the moment when a good guy becomes a bad guy in a way. And then, since then, usually then after that, there's a long trajectory of, if that is not caught, if that fanaticism is not curbed, then eventually that person may become a bad leader. And of course, the words like good and bad, they're big words, and I'm using them. Well, they're very generalized words. It's not how I mean them, but I think it is extremely, extremely important to watch out for that fanaticism in oneself. And ultimately, that's something that every human being has an existential right and obligation to do. And I think it's extremely important. And my theory is that once many more people will take responsibility for curbing their own fanaticism, regardless of what their ideas are and regardless what camp they're coming from, I think that is the moment when we'll start actually healing.
How would
can't
you,
heal people by force.
yeah, how would you define fanaticism?
Well, I think fanaticism is something that is, well, let me give an example from history, from very old history. For instance, when the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, he decided from his own internals, from his own psychological inner workings, he decided that polytheism as he understood it was wrong, was bad, that it was not theologically correct. And say maybe he did not really understand the traditions that he was considering incorrect. So maybe he didn't have the sensory perspective to understand it. Maybe he didn't do the job to do the necessary work to understand it. Or maybe it was his path to try something else. But so in his head, he decided that it was incorrect. And then by force, he told his people, okay, now you're going to abandon your old ways. Now you're going to believe in God the way I say is correct. And of course, we don't know what was in his head. But from his actions, he might have thought that he was actually correct. He might have thought that he was doing the right thing, that he was bringing the people over to his side of believing in God correctly or celebrating the faith correctly. But as a result, we ended up with more limiting perspectives, more limiting ways of conduct everything, actually do everything in life. The whole world history was changed because that one person came up with this idea and was forceful about this idea. Thus, he was fanatical. Like similarly, leaders of other lands in other countries, they decided that their people wanted to be civilized. And probably their motives were political. They wanted to be cool among the leaders of their own countries. And that applies to more than one world religion. Actually, most world religions were developed this way. And then the leader decided that the people ought to be civilized. They ought to practice something else. They ought to have faith differently and to celebrate their faith differently. And they used force to do that, like blood and violence. And people were forced to do that. And then many generations later, people forgot the trauma and they just know that something's missing and they don't know what it is. And it causes all sorts of sensory issues, all sorts of sensory deprivation. And many of the problems we're dealing with today, in my feeling, they actually derive from all those issues historically that happened many centuries ago. It's just a natural progression. Things get worse and worse and worse and worse and more sensory deprived. And what's happening right now with the attempt to combat nature completely, to disconnect from nature entirely, that is not a new battle, that is an old battle. But it boils down, again, if we really try to trace it to its roots, then the chance is it'll go back to centuries ago when people decided that the product of their brain or their idea was more important than their mysterious connection with nature that they could not control. They wanted to control it. So that's a very long answer again.
Yeah, and it seems like there is this like seismic shift that's happening, and a lot of people don't really understand what that shift is. You know, where it's headed to, and to me, it is a break from not organisms, but like life, be it human life. So it's life, either human life or animal life or plant life not having any inherent rights of itself, like to live. It's just something that's used for the machine. Now we've had this with plants and animals for a long time. We have had a total disregard for other life, but it seems like that system that was built around is now turning on the people, where the people are going to be treated in the similar fashion to the plants and animals have in the past, like you serve this thing or you don't exist. And the idea that you have any inherent right in and of yourself to live or to operate or to choose another path is being erased. You serve this system, and how do you fit in? Where do you fit into serving this economic system? And there's nothing else outside of that. And it's like your
Oh,
rights, what was formerly thought of as rights are now going to be privileges that you need to earn by serving this thing.
I agree with you, and I think it's a very interesting twist because we're kind of going back, if we don't resist, that is. So we are ushered towards feudalism, but that idea of not appreciating people or the majority of people is not new, of course, because this is feudalism, this is slavery, this is all the colonial pursuits that did not appreciate the people unless the people were you, who is a person with a lot of money or a lot of power. And so, like, you are like, the person talking was the only person getting appreciated in a model that existed for centuries. And I think that we had this probably marketing gimmick. Honestly, if you go and look back at how people in the West lived before, say, World War II, factory workers were not doing great at all. The life standards were very low for the majority of people. So there was only this period of time from World War II until maybe 2000 when a lot of people in the West had very high standards of living, and of course at the expense of poisoning the planet and all the wars and all that. But there was this period of time of good life where all of a sudden they were talking about human rights and consumer rights. It was all about consumerism. And what actually happened historically was that when the Industrial Revolution happened, and then all of a sudden production became very cheap, industrialists have figured out that they would actually benefit more from people having some free time and some spending power because production was cheap. And they needed people to actually buy what they produced. And so industrialists amongst themselves decided that, okay, so we do need to make a shorter workday, 40-hour work week, so that people can have some free time. During the weekend, they go traveling, they go for a road trip, and which means they need to buy a car. And so the whole system about consumer freedoms and perks and high standard of living for many people was designed around consumer power. It's not because all of a sudden somebody started caring about human rights. And then, of course, from the Western perspective, a lot of troubles created and necessary outside of the Western world, they were invisible, they were hidden. And human nature is such that people usually only care about problems that impact them directly. And I'm saying it non-judgmentally. Every human being is mostly like that. I mean, we start caring about some problems because we're impacted. This is how whistleblowers show up. Because, when we're personally impacted, then we care. But the world is full of injustices, and it's impossible to care about everything. So ultimately, again, we are being taken back to slaves in a way, but maybe more subtly. We'll see. I think that it's really up to us what happens. So, and I think that our aspiring overlords, they are trying to do it subtly, if they can. If they can, then again, we'll see what happens. But it is true that that whole order of many centuries prior to today, where only a handful of people had a good life and had power, and the rest were not really free, and they were either peasants, slaves. They did not have much freedom or much money. We are getting back there if we don't really stand up to that. And of course, it is a far more complex topic than any conversation can actually carry, and because the planet is finite and the resource usage and all that. But I think the problem right now is that the people with most power and with most money, they have completely lost their minds. And the shift that has happened, that started really happening starting in probably 2001, and that became really, really visible last year, the root of that shift was more in the minds of the super billionaires, because they have decided, they became really worried that the planet is finite, that there's not enough for them, and there's too many peasants. And I think they freaked out. And once they started freaking out actively, they figured, okay, so what do we do? How do we manage all of our resources? And of course, they consider people and trees and animals and minerals and water and everything and air, which is a new frontier of commercial and other, warfare. But they decided that they need to manage those resources more efficiently. And of course, as the technology was developing, up until now, they did not feel like they had the technology to really manage it efficiently enough to their liking. And now they think that AI is going to be their manager, and the technology is finally there. They can take care of it. They can put sensors in all living objects and all living forms, and they can track us efficiently. And because there's so much data, then AI comes to rescue and AI manages us. And there's a lot of demagoguery around it. There's a lot of mythology and marketing tricks. And they're selling us all the marketing tricks. But in reality, of course, they're trying to just manage us efficiently. And I think it's going to fail. I don't think that it's going to work. But unfortunately, as they're trying, there's a chance for a lot of pain being created in the process, and we can see that happening. Like right now, since last year, it is really visible to people in the West. So hopefully a lot more people wake up and just internally, from the internal strength, from the internal love, resist that.
Yeah, for sure. And it is like, I do think it does come down to like the difference between believing in your own heart and your own intuition and your own research and your own community, other people that you actually know and trust, versus believing in this like there's like this outside thing that's like it's on the screen, it's not here. It's almost like we've given our own I'm trying to think of how to word this. We're believing in these people from far away, as opposed to closer to home. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I have a theory that as human beings, we're not designed to live in very big communities and to have empires for sure, because we can only relate to that many people. Biologically, just physiologically, we can only consciously relate to that many people. And then when it becomes more people than we can relate to, we just shut down as an overloaded system. And then, of course, it's hard to think about people who live far away from a different culture. And probably the bigger the spirit, the more people think about people everywhere. But it's hard, even on the everyday basis. We all use things that were manufactured creating havoc. Like I'm talking on the phone right now, and children in Africa had to mine toxic chemicals, toxic and precious metals, to enable me to use this phone. And in my ideal life, I would not use this phone. That would be my ideal. But then I have to stop eating because I need this phone to make money too. And we are all put in this situation where the entire life, the entire way of eating and making money and making connections, it's dependent on bigger things that are in turn rooted in very broken things, creating pain. And I think it is a process of healing that will get us out of there. And it took us so many centuries to get to this broken state. So the chance is that the change is not going to happen overnight. And I think the intention of really, really, really putting our souls in doing our best is what's going to get us out eventually. And it is everyday courage, and it is not glamorous. The thing is, there's this American model where like spiritual quests are supposed to be glamorous, like you're this character in a movie that is a central part. You're starring this movie with all those heroic events. But in reality, it's not like that. It's not glamorous. It's, you scream and cry and you feel alone and you do your best and you feel like an idiot and you try again and then you feel like an idiot and you try again. And sometimes you're misunderstood, oftentimes, and nobody sees it, and it's just sweat and tears, and it's not glamorous. But I think that's what we need to do, and in the end, we'll see the fruit of it. And then we'll still have to continue working in it, but I don't think there's other way. I think that perhaps being afraid of this process is what tempted people a long time ago to disconnect from nature to begin with, because doing things natural way is not necessarily easy, and it's not glamorous. It's work, and people are lazy. So that's another long answer.
Yeah. Well, I've been reading. I'm trying to get through all of Klaus Schwab's books and trying to wrap my mind around, the mentality that's driving all of this. And I've also been, for my work, I've been doing some jobs within the crypto space, and I have some major issues with the cryptocurrencies. Although most of the people that I've worked with, they're actually really good people who have really great, visions, and they want to make the world a better place. I think there's something structurally wrong with that, though. That the difference between like a more natural, like organic kind of mindset of like, I'd say earth-based versus kind of like, oh, our problems are technological in nature. We need a better technology to solve this problem, as opposed to the idea that I think our problem is human, and there's something about our connection to each other and to ecology and to the future, and it has nothing at all to do with technology, and technology just kind of adds another layer to it, but it's still there, and unless we deal with that, we're going to continue down this path, which, by the way, is it's to say it's anti-life. I think it's a very accurate thing to say, because they even say we're going to change what it means to be human. We want to merge, technology and biology. We want to merge man and machine, and also in the process, we see just how much life is being decimated on Earth, and converted into this technology. And I always like the quote from Neil Postman. Do you know Neil Postman?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the quote was, with technologists, they always talk about what we gain, but never about what we lose. And I think that that's a really valuable thing to think about, that we really are losing something here. And I don't think that most people have really like acknowledged that, and like probably don't even believe it, really. Like it's not even a part of their consciousness,
I agree with you, and I think that the problem really is human. So, as far as, say, crypto, blockchain, all that, I was laughing at it for years in my musicians' activism, anti-big tech plight, and it was just actually funny. And when it was considered a really cool thing to do, and I even went to some events where people were rather fanatical about it. They were actually rather fanatical about it. So. I do think that the problem is not either for technology or against technology. Again, if a lot of people attend to their internals, which is work, again, and I want to reiterate again, it's not glamorous at all. It's actually difficult and not glamorous. But if our hearts are healed, then we will we will use technology significantly wiser. And we're not going to solve anything by adopting a technology, and we're not going to solve much by banning a technology by force. There is, for instance, a movie that is not many people know about it, but I am completely I admire that film. It's a Bangladeshi film called Television, and how do I do this without actually spoiling the plot? So it's about a small village in Bangladesh, and the religious leader who is trying to take care of the souls of the people in this village by banning them from watching television. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say more, but I highly, highly recommend watching it. It's extremely moving, and I don't think that we can again solve any problem investing in technology. This is obviously just silly, because honestly, even if the internet never showed up and the telephones never showed up, and we could have very, very full lives and happy and have good relationships and probably better quality lives than now. But at the same time, if we just say that we are going to stay broken, but we are going to ban this technology, I don't think it's going to work, because everything people do, including in technology and in art and in science and in every area, we try to express our creativity that we were born with. And again, my theory even about technical psychopaths, who I don't like at all, and I don't like them at all, but I think what they do is, in a very misguided way, they're expressing their nature-given creativity, because it is human nature to try to make an impact, to try to do something that is new, that nobody has been done, and something that is mine, essentially. And if it comes from a place of spiritual balance, and if the person retains humility and the deeper feeling that we are a part of the universe, and we have absolutely no way to know the bigger picture in its complete entirety. It's not possible. That's not what we're here for. We cannot do that. But we can have this feeling, and we can connect, and we can be creative, we can create beautiful things, and we can do our best to be in harmony with the world. Then the result of that kind of creativity, that again requires work. I mean, I keep saying that, but that kind of creativity requires humility and work. But then the result is beautiful, and then the communities are healthy, then the relationships are good. But if human beings don't take care of that work, if we don't know how to heal ourselves, we don't know how to heal others, we're just stuck with all this trauma, with all the confusion, with all the ambitions, with thinking that unless we prove to be successful in the modern understanding of that, meaning money and power, then nobody's going to like us. And that's a terrible feeling. And then whatever creativity we are born with, we invested into silly things or destructive things. And I think that the solutions, again, lie in the heart, in humility, and in trying to restore this connection, which is a mysterious process. There's no formula for that. There's no formula for that at all.
Well, you say restore the connection, and it's interesting because what I feel like is happening right now is a major disintegration, and not just of like the economic system and our governmental systems and everything like that, but amongst human beings. I think that there's a division that's happening right now that's really tragic. And I know, like, there's a lot of dehumanization that goes on of others based on where they're coming from. And I've had some people, and I've talked a lot about this, but it's people extremely angry at me that feel that I'm doing harm to people by having the perspective that I have, not even getting into the fact that it's actually
Right.
it's backed by incredible amounts of evidence that people don't want to actually face and look at. But also too, I've also felt anger and disgust at my fellow human beings. I go to the grocery store and I just look around at everybody and I'm just like, my blood boils. I'm just like, I'm really, because I see where this is headed, and it's hard for me not to just, like, oh, let bygone, let everyone just be their, whoever they are or whatever. You have this thing that's coming, that you see this thing coming that's really, really dark, and most people don't see it. All they see is the narrative that they're being told, and in terms of how you create some sort of unity when the differences of understanding of what's actually happening are that vast, that there's such a huge chasm between those things, and it seems to be growing. I thought over time, people will start to come around and see, okay, yeah, maybe there's something a little bit off here. But I see people just like digging in, really. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is a very important topic, and obviously it's not black and white at all, and there's no single answer. But I've thought about it a lot, and actually I think about it daily, and I have feelings about it all the time. Uh, First of all, it's very understandable to feel anger about that, and the propaganda is just massive. The propaganda that we are subjected to is absolutely disgustingly massive, and unfortunately, it works. And what is happening is this absolutely abysmal and disgusting state and corporate abuse. That is, it is horrible. It is really bad. But I have a few stories in response. At some point, I was in a very very abusive relationship, and I was very young, and my ego was big in terms of going to a very good school, considering myself very smart, and abuse could never happen to me. So, and I went all the way in. I went all the way in. I was in denial. I did not. I had no idea how to deal with it. I had no idea how to even come to agreement internally that something abusive could be happening to me, to the smart person with all good schools and connections and social doings. And so I did not admit to that until it was extremely late, and until the situation was absolutely horrendous and actually dangerous. So that, and then walking back and trying to heal over that, which took many years and a lot of work, I started thinking, why it was so obvious. The abuse was obvious. There was every sign of it. Things were completely weird. They were abnormal. They were crazy. They were disrespectful with me. They were bad, and yet I was looking for excuses. Not looking. My brain was finding explanations of, okay, this is not so bad, or maybe I was wrong, or maybe I misunderstood. This is physiology. This is how stress impacts people, and I that taught me to not blame people who are in denial of the abuse that they have been subjected to, because I've done it myself, and I'm not the most gullible person in the world, and nonetheless I did it. So when other people are subjected to abuse for the very first time, and they were comfortable, they had that idea that America has a democracy and that we are in a very good place and our government would never do something horrendous like that to us. And that is a very pleasant state of mind. So, because it is a pleasant state of mind, it is very hard to part with it, even when senses and facts are in contradiction. Still, the brain works in such a way that it tries to come up with the most pleasing story, the story that makes you feel the most important, the most loved, and or at least the most sane, the most right. Maybe less so love, but right. So that if the brain tries to prove that I'm correct, that my story is correct. So for that reason, I think that kindness is the only way. Unless, of course, when people get obnoxious and aggressive, then you just treat them like, okay, so they're a little bit sick right now, they're a little bit crazy right now, so maybe it's best to stay stay away from them. But anger, I think, is not a good emotion no matter what. It comes up, it's a natural feeling, then you deal with it. So, you come up with rituals for yourself. You do something in nature, you try to cleanse yourself, you try to be good. Meaning good not as in approved by others, but internally come to balance. And then interact with others from a place that is not angry. And as far as the bigger picture, it is like what I'm about to say is it's a lot easier said than done. But I think with an internal feeling of wisdom of life, it is a lot easier to handle, because if you assume that you're here for a reason, and all of us, I believe, are here for a reason, and the reason we are born in this time, in this challenging, very, very strange time, again, that there's a reason for that, and which means we're prepared to deal with it, to figure it out, even though it might be difficult and painful, and we need to cry and kick and scream and look for solutions and pray and do all those things, but we have the internal capacity to deal with it in the best way. And I think that this situation is calling for us to really look on the inside and look for that peace of mind and confidence and faith in the universe, in nature, in, if anybody has a religious belief, then in whatever way they believe. I think that's the only way to deal with it that is not going to drive us crazy. Because if you try to approach it from the perspective that is purely logical, in which we assume that, okay, this is what's happening, things are horrible, this whole dystopia is happening, they're destroying nature, they are doing, smart dust, smart fabrics, all those nanoparticles, nano robots, like geoengineering, all this pollution, it's horrible. There's no way one human being can figure out how to deal with it. It is horrifying, it is destructive. But if we trust nature to be able to take care of all of that, assuming we treat her with respect, assuming that we do not allow ourselves to be cowards, assuming that we work with our trauma, we work with our anger, and we really make sure that we heal ourselves and we help others heal to the best of our ability, because there's no formula for that. There's nobody that is going to combine and say, oh, like, good job, now you pass this, you pass this, you get an A grade. It's not how it works. So you'll feel internally that something is moving forward. But I think that we are looking at a tremendous, tremendous opportunity to really reconnect with the spirit in the most sacred way. And I'm not talking about any particular religion or any particular way of believing, because, we all have our own. But for a while, for a long time, people have been trying to separate from nature. People have been trying to live in fantasy that was feeding their ego, that was feeding their stories. And there was nonetheless a lot of beauty that came as a result of it. The people, the art that comes from pain, that comes from the desire to be pure. I mean, that is all ultimately beautiful in many ways, but there are healthier ways to go about it. And maybe we're just given another opportunity to see humanity in each other and to connect to the spirit and try to be wise and humble. Because the way I look at it, we are going through something that is similar to a religious reform. Like, for instance, when Europeans came to the Americas or to Africa or to other places, and again, Europeans were not the only one doing that. They're the most familiar face of colonization, but they definitely weren't the only ones. But when they came to all those places, and local people from all the places that were invaded, they had no idea how to deal with it. And they had to go through this completely weird reform that was forced with violence and deceit and divide and conquer. And it was probably a very puzzling experience for people facing those colonizers, because Europeans brought in a different way of thinking, a different way of looking at life. And it was impossible for local people to know that from the get-go. So I think what we're looking at right now is correcting of all of that in a way that is possibly new to human history, or maybe to non-human history, that we have to invent it from our hearts right now, all of us. And looking back, we see that divide and conquer really didn't work out for the locals. Because when different leaders of different nations are put against each other and all old rivalries are exploited, then what happens in the end? In the end, the invader wins. So if we allow ourselves to be divided right now on petty disagreements or on egos, or I think that we're done. I think that then we have no chance.
Yeah,
I
a
think
couple of things on that. Go ahead.
yeah.
Oh,
I don't know. I mean, sorry. Go ahead.
no, it's okay. No, a couple thoughts came up with what you were saying, which was, one of them is interesting because the world leaders, if you want to call them that, like, the people that are ruling over us, that's kind of the language that they use of, like, we're in this together and we need to come together and all of us need, but what it really means to them is that, you all need to come together and submit to our will. So like their idea like of singularity basically means the elimination of everyone as an individual, and everyone comes together and serves this thing, as opposed to what I think you're talking about, which is everyone coming together as individuals with free will and a heart and a mind and working together collaboratively, as opposed to working together on this project that none of us actually had anything to do with its creation, or you know what I mean? Like it's
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I agree with you completely.